Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing and peaceful tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is The Shepherd Boy's Journey. So settle in, get cozy, and let yourself be carried away into a world of rolling hills, bustling markets, and the timeless rhythms of a shepherd's life. Now let's begin. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the rolling hills, painting the countryside in hues of soft gold and amber. Alen stood outside his family's modest stone cottage, his woolen cloak wrapped tightly around him against the early morning chill. His flock of sheep gathered nearby, their soft bleats mingling with the distant trill of a skylark. Today was the day he would take them to market, where their fresh wool would be shorn and sold. Inside, the hearth crackled warmly as Alen's mother prepared a bundle of provisions for the journey. She wrapped fresh bread, dried apples, and a small wedge of cheese in linen and placed them into Alen's satchel. Her hands, weathered from years of work, lingered for a moment on his shoulder. "Remember to care for the flock as you would yourself," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Their wool is valuable because they are well tended." "I will, Mother," Alen replied, meeting her gaze. "I'll keep them safe." His father, a tall and sturdy man, entered the room carrying Alen's shears, freshly sharpened. "These will serve you well at the market," he said, placing them into Alen's hands. "Shearing on site means more buyers and better prices." Alen nodded, understanding the importance of his task. The shearing process would require care and precision, and the health of the sheep would reflect in the quality of their wool. Outside, Alen's younger sisters hovered near the gate, their excitement evident. "Don't forget to bring us ribbons from the market," one of them called out, while the other giggled, clutching a small doll made from scraps of fabric. Alen chuckled, ruffling their hair. "I'll find the finest ribbons for you both," he promised. The family gathered near the gate as Alen secured the flock's lead rope and adjusted the satchel over his shoulder. Bryn, the loyal sheepdog, trotted eagerly at his side, ready to take on the day's journey. His mother gave him one last hug, and his father placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Stay on the main roads," his father advised, "and keep your wits about you. Buyers value fresh wool, but they value a shepherd's honesty even more. Trade fairly, son." "I will, father," Alen said, his voice steady. With a final wave, Alen led the flock onto the dirt path that wound its way through the hills. The rhythmic clatter of hooves and the gentle rustle of grass accompanied him as he walked, the cottage growing smaller with every step. He glanced back once to see his family standing by the gate, framed by the warm light of the rising sun. The morning unfolded with a quiet beauty. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the undulating hills. Alen's boots pressed into the damp earth, leaving a trail that disappeared into the horizon. The sheep moved steadily, their trust in him evident as they followed his every step. As he walked, Alen's mind wandered to the market ahead. He imagined the bustling stalls, the scent of fresh bread and spices wafting through the air, and the sound of merchants calling out their wares. This journey was not just a trade mission. It was a vital part of sustaining his family through the coming months. The coins he earned would buy supplies, and the gifts he planned to bring home would bring smiles to his sisters' faces. By midday, Alen paused at the crest of a hill that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. The field stretched out like a patchwork quilt, dotted with farmhouses and the occasional plume of smoke from a distant chimney. He crouched near a small brook, letting the cool water trickle over his hands before refilling his flask. Bryn drank eagerly, his bright eyes scanning the horizon. After a brief rest, Alen resumed his journey. The path meandered through meadows dotted with wildflowers, their vibrant hues swaying in the gentle breeze. He hummed a tune, the melody blending with the soft bleats of the sheep and the rustle of leaves overhead. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting the landscape in warm, golden tones, Alen found a sheltered spot beneath a large oak tree. He herded the flock into a natural enclosure formed by fallen branches and rocks, ensuring their safety for the night. He built a small fire, its crackling warmth warding off the evening chill. From his satchel, he retrieved a piece of bread and a handful of dried apples, sharing the simple meal with Bryn. The sheepdog lay curled by the fire, his tail wagging lazily as Alen scratched behind his ears. The stars began to appear, their light piercing through the darkening sky. Alen leaned back against the tree trunk, gazing upward. His thoughts turned to his family and the promises he carried with him, to trade honestly, to return safely, and to bring joy to those waiting for him. With the steady rhythm of the sheep's breathing and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, Alen drifted into a peaceful sleep, the fire's embers glowing softly beside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now he rested, cradled by the quiet embrace of the hills. The morning sun cast its golden rays over the endless green plains as Alen and his flock resumed their journey. The sheep moved steadily, their soft bleats blending with the rustling of tall grass and the distant call of larks. Bryn trotted ahead, occasionally darting into the grass to flush out curious rabbits or to guide stray sheep back to the flock. Despite the early hour, the world felt alive, humming with quiet energy. The dirt path wound gently through the plains, bordered by fields of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Alen adjusted the strap of his satchel and gripped his crook firmly as he guided the flock. The thought of the market ahead filled his mind. He imagined the buyers inspecting the freshly shorn wool, their discerning eyes evaluating the quality. His father's words echoed in his mind. The sheep's health reflects in their wool. Take care of them, and they'll take care of you. By mid-morning, Alen spotted a weathered wooden signpost pointing toward the first village. The sight brought a sense of excitement and relief. Memories of the kind baker and her honey cakes surfaced, and he quickened his pace, eager to reach the village before sunset. The promise of warm bread and a familiar smile made the long journey feel lighter. As the sun climbed higher, Alen paused near a small brook. He crouched by the water's edge, letting the cool stream trickle over his hands before refilling his flask. The sheep gathered nearby, their thirst drawing them to the clear water. Bryn drank eagerly, his bright eyes scanning the surrounding meadow. After the short rest, Alen continued along the path. The plains stretched out endlessly before him, the gentle hum of insects filling the air. He began to hum a tune, the melody blending with the soft bleats of the sheep and the rustle of leaves. It was a song his mother often sang during evenings by the hearth, and its familiarity brought a sense of comfort. Midway through the plains, Alen encountered a traveling peddler. The man's cart was laden with an assortment of goods, glinting pots, colorful fabrics, and small trinkets that sparkled in the sunlight. The peddler greeted Alen with a wide smile, his voice hearty. "Well met, young shepherd. What brings you across these parts today?" "I'm heading to market with my flock," Alen replied, gesturing to the sheep. "Their wool will be shorn and sold." The peddler nodded, his eyes twinkling. "A noble task. Perhaps you'd like a little music to lighten your journey?" He reached into his cart and pulled out a small tin whistle. "Take this. It's simple, but it'll bring cheer to the long road. Consider it a trade for a tuft of wool." Alen hesitated briefly, but then smiled. "Thank you, sir. That's a fair trade." He plucked a handful of wool from one of the sheep and handed it over. The whistle, though simple, gleamed as if freshly polished. He tucked it into his pocket, feeling its smooth surface with satisfaction. As he resumed his journey, Alen occasionally played a cheerful tune on the whistle. The music seemed to lift the spirits of the flock, their bleats more lively as they followed him. Bryn wagged his tail in approval, bounding ahead with renewed energy. By late afternoon, the path grew narrower, weaving through a cluster of trees. The shade offered a welcome reprieve from the sun's heat, and Alen allowed the sheep to graze in the cool undergrowth. He leaned against a tree trunk, his thoughts turning to the village ahead. He pictured the cobblestone streets bustling with activity, the aroma of fresh bread wafting through the air, and the sound of merchants calling out their wares. As the day neared its end, Alen reached the crest of a gentle hill. From there, he caught his first glimpse of the village nestled in the valley below. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the faint sound of a bell echoed in the distance. Relief and anticipation quickened his steps as he descended the path, the first day of his journey drawing to a close. The sight of the village's familiar rooftops filled him with warmth. Alen smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new encounters and the first of many trades. For now, though, he was content to rest, the promise of a warm meal and friendly faces waiting just ahead. The forest loomed ahead, its tall trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. Alen approached the shaded path, where sunlight filtered through the canopy in delicate beams, illuminating patches of moss and clusters of mushrooms along the forest floor. The soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird filled the air, creating a symphony of calm. Bryn trotted at Alen's side, his nose twitching as he sniffed the rich, earthy scents of the woods. The sheep followed closely, their wool brushing against the low-hanging branches as they moved in a steady line. Alen adjusted his satchel and tightened his grip on the crook, feeling both the peace and the mystery of the forest enveloping him. The path was narrow, weaving between towering trunks and over gnarled roots that jutted out like ancient veins. Alen tread carefully, his boots pressing into the soft earth. He paused occasionally to inspect the flock, ensuring they remained close. The health of the sheep was paramount. Their wool would soon be sheared fresh for the discerning buyers in the market. Midway through the forest, Alen stumbled upon a small clearing. In its center stood a modest wooden hut with smoke curling from its chimney. Outside, an old woodcutter sat on a tree stump, sharpening his axe. The man looked up as Alen approached, his face breaking into a welcoming smile. "Well met, young shepherd," the woodcutter called out, his voice gravelly but kind. "What brings you through the forest today?" "I'm heading to the market with my flock," Alen replied. "Their wool will be shorn and sold." The woodcutter nodded approvingly. "A noble journey. Rest here a while. The forest is kinder when shared with company." Grateful for the invitation, Alen guided the flock to a grassy patch nearby and joined the woodcutter by the fire pit. The man handed him a tin cup filled with steaming broth, its savory aroma warming Alen's senses. They spoke for a time, the woodcutter sharing tales of the forest's history and the travelers who had passed through its winding paths. "There's an old stream just ahead," the woodcutter said, pointing deeper into the woods. "Its water is cool and sweet. Your sheep will appreciate it." Alen thanked him, rising to continue his journey. The woodcutter handed him a small bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. "For the road," he said, "a bit of flavor for your meals and a remedy for weariness." As Alen ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in, their branches forming an intricate web above. The light grew dimmer, and the air turned cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Bryn stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound, while the sheep moved steadily along the path. Soon, Alen reached the stream the woodcutter had mentioned. Its water sparkled in the filtered sunlight, flowing over smooth stones with a soft murmur. Alen knelt by the bank, letting the cool water run over his hands before refilling his flask. The sheep eagerly drank, their thirst evident after the long walk. Alen lingered by the stream, taking in the tranquil beauty of the forest. The gentle sound of flowing water and the rustling of leaves above seemed to wrap him in a cocoon of calm. He thought of his family back home, imagining their smiles when he returned with stories of the journey and gifts from the market. Continuing onward, the path began to widen, and the canopy above grew thinner. Shafts of sunlight broke through, illuminating the way ahead. The forest slowly gave way to open meadows, and Alen felt a sense of accomplishment as he stepped out from beneath the trees. That evening, Alen set up camp on the edge of the forest. He gathered fallen branches to build a small fire and prepared a simple meal using the herbs the woodcutter had given him. The aroma of the stew filled the air, mingling with the fresh scent of grass and wildflowers. Bryn lay curled by the fire, his steady breathing a comforting presence. Alen leaned back against a rock, gazing at the stars as they appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The forest, with all its mystery and beauty, had been a quiet companion on his journey. He closed his eyes, letting the crackling fire and the distant hoot of an owl lull him to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new paths and challenges, but for now he rested, content in the peace of the moment. The sunlight grew brighter as Alen stepped out of the forest's shadow and into the open plains. In the distance, the village nestled in the valley came into view, its rooftops dotted with chimneys puffing trails of smoke. The sight filled him with warmth and anticipation. After days on the road, he was nearing the first stop of his journey. Bryn barked eagerly, running a short distance ahead, and the sheep's bleats grew livelier, sensing the change. Alen guided the flock down the gentle slope that led toward the village gates, his pace quickening with each step. As he approached, a cheerful guard waved him through with a friendly nod. The cobblestone streets of the village bustled with activity. Merchants called out their wares, children dashed between market stalls, and the aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of roasting meats. Alen felt his spirits lift as he guided the sheep to a shaded pen near the marketplace, where other shepherds had also gathered with their flocks. Once the sheep were secured, Alen set off toward the baker's shop. The familiar bell over the door jingled as he entered, and Marta the baker looked up from her work with a warm smile. "Alen, I thought we might see you this season," she said, brushing flour from her hands. "Come, you must try these. They're fresh from the oven." She handed him a small honey cake, its golden surface glistening in the morning light. Alen took a bite, the sweetness melting on his tongue. "Thank you, Marta," he said, smiling. "It's perfect, as always." He purchased a small loaf of bread to take with him and promised to visit again before leaving the village. From there, he made his way to the blacksmith's shop. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal echoed through the open doorway as the blacksmith worked on a glowing horseshoe. "Alen," the blacksmith greeted, setting down his hammer. "What brings you to my forge today?" "A sharpening stone for my father," Alen replied. "His is nearly worn through." The blacksmith nodded and handed him a sturdy stone, its surface smooth and ready for use. Alen thanked him, tucking the package into his satchel. He knew his father would appreciate the thoughtfulness of the gift. By midday, Alen returned to the pen where his sheep rested peacefully. Buyers were beginning to arrive, inspecting the flocks and asking shepherds about their wool. One merchant, a sharp-eyed man with a measuring scale in hand, approached Alen. "These sheep look well kept," the merchant remarked, running a hand over the thick fleece of one ewe. "Do you shear on sight?" "I do," Alen replied, retrieving his shears from his satchel. "Freshly shorn wool is preferred, isn't it?" The merchant nodded approvingly. "That's true. Let's see the quality." Alen set to work, carefully shearing a few sheep under the merchant's watchful eye. The fleece came away in soft, even layers, piling neatly beside him. The merchant weighed the wool and smiled. "Excellent. I'll take this lot and return for more later." The coins he handed over jingled in Alan's pouch, a satisfying weight that marked the first success of the trip. As the day wore on, Alen sold more wool, shearing each sheep with the same care and precision. By the late afternoon, his flock looked lighter but content, grazing lazily in the pen. Alen's hands were tired, but his heart was full. The village had welcomed him warmly, and the progress he had made gave him hope for the journey ahead. That evening, Alen visited the village inn, where the innkeeper greeted him with a hearty clap on the shoulder. "You've earned a good meal, lad," the man said, placing a steaming bowl of stew and a tankard of cider before him. Alen ate slowly, savoring each bite as he listened to the lively chatter of villagers around him. Stories of harvests, upcoming festivals, and the changing weather filled the air, weaving a rich tapestry of life in the village. Alen felt a deep connection to it all, even as a passing traveler. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in soft twilight, Alen returned to the pen to check on his flock one last time. Satisfied that they were safe and comfortable, he found a quiet spot near the outskirts to rest for the night. Under the canopy of stars, Alen lay with Bryn at his side. The dog's steady breathing a soothing rhythm. The warmth of the village lingered in his thoughts as he drifted off to sleep, ready to face the next leg of his journey. The gentle murmur of flowing water greeted Alen as he left the village behind and approached the wide, glimmering river that cut through the valley. The sun was high, its light dancing on the rippling surface and casting a golden hue across the landscape. Bryn ran ahead, sniffing curiously at the reeds along the bank while the sheep moved steadily, their occasional bleats blending with the sounds of the river. Alen paused at the riverbank, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The sight of the ferry boat bobbing gently at the dock brought a sense of relief. He guided the flock closer, and the ferryman, a burly man with a weathered face, waved cheerfully. "Shepherd boy, need a crossing," the ferryman called out. Alen nodded, approaching with a smile. "Yes, sir. How much for the flock and me?" The ferryman scratched his chin thoughtfully. "A few coins should do it, or perhaps a bit of wool for the missus to spin?" Alen considered this and then reached into his satchel, pulling out a handful of freshly shorn fleece. "Will this be enough?" The ferryman's eyes lit up. "More than enough. Hop aboard." Guiding the sheep onto the ferry took some effort. The animals hesitated at first, their hooves clattering on the wooden planks, but with gentle nudges and Bryn's encouragement, they soon settled. The ferry rocked gently as the ferryman pushed off, his oar slicing through the water with practiced ease. As they drifted across the river, the ferryman struck up a conversation. He spoke of the travelers who had passed through, merchants, pilgrims, and farmers, and shared stories of the river's moods, from its calm days to its wild storms. Alen listened intently, his imagination painting vivid pictures of the ferryman's tales. "You're doing a good thing, lad," the ferryman said, his voice warm. "Taking care of your flock, trading fairly. The world needs more of that." Alen smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his journey. "Thank you. It's for my family. Their trust means everything to me." The ferry reached the opposite bank, and Alen guided the flock back onto solid ground. He thanked the ferryman, who waved him off with a grin. "Safe travels, young shepherd." The path along the riverbank was serene, flanked by tall grasses swaying in the breeze. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, their vibrant colors a cheerful contrast to the deep green of the meadows. Alen stopped briefly at a small riverside market where vendors had set up wooden stalls laden with fresh produce, jars of honey, and handmade trinkets. One vendor, a kind-faced woman with a sun hat, waved Alen over. "Care for some apples, shepherd? Freshly picked this morning." Alen exchanged a few coins for a handful of rosy apples. He also purchased a small jar of honey, knowing his family would appreciate its sweetness during the colder months. The vendor, noticing Bryn's curious gaze, tossed him a piece of dried meat. Bryn wagged his tail enthusiastically, earning a laugh from the woman. The market buzzed with quiet energy, but there was a sense of calm among the people, a shared appreciation for the simple joys of life by the river. Alen lingered for a while, enjoying the sights and sounds before continuing on his way. By late afternoon, Alen reached a shady grove where the river curved gently, creating a natural resting spot. He let the sheep graze while he set up a small camp. Using stones from the riverbed, he built a fire pit and boiled water for tea, adding a few dried herbs from the bundle given to him by the woodcutter. The fragrant brew filled the air, its warmth soothing after the long day. As he sipped his tea, Alen watched the river flow steadily, its surface catching the soft hues of the setting sun. Bryn lay nearby, gnawing contentedly on his treat. The tranquility of the moment reminded Alen of the ferryman's stories and the unseen lives connected by the river's winding path. Nightfall came softly, the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Alen lay on his back, his hands folded behind his head as he gazed upward. The sound of the river, steady and unchanging, lulled him into a peaceful state. He thought of his family, imagining their joy when he returned with tales of the journey and the treasures he carried. With Bryn's steady breathing beside him and the river's song in his ears, Alen closed his eyes, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. The morning sun rose gently, casting a warm glow over the landscape as Alen and his flock departed from the tranquil riverbanks. The path before them led into the rolling hills, their peaks bathed in sunlight that shimmered like golden waves. The sheep moved steadily, their lighter frames after shearing, allowing them to navigate the inclines with ease. Bryn bounded ahead, his energy undiminished, while Alen kept a steady pace behind the flock, his crook in hand. The hills were alive with vibrant colors. Fields of poppies stretched out on either side of the path, their red petals swaying gently in the breeze. Wild lavender grew in scattered patches, its fragrance carried on the air. Alen paused to pick a small sprig, tucking it into his satchel to remind him of this peaceful morning. Above, birds flitted between the trees, their songs mingling with the soft bleats of the sheep. By mid-morning, the path grew steeper, winding up a hill crowned by a cluster of oak trees. Alen stopped briefly to let the sheep rest and graze. He leaned against the trunk of one of the trees, taking a long sip from his flask. From this vantage point, he could see the expanse of the valley behind him, dotted with farmhouses and the sparkling ribbon of the river they had crossed the day before. The view filled him with a sense of accomplishment, the distance traveled a testament to his perseverance. As the journey continued, Alen came across a group of travelers resting under a large sycamore tree. They were musicians, their instruments, lutes, drums, and fiddles, resting against their packs. One of them, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes, called out to him, "Well met, young shepherd. Care to join us for a while?" Alen guided his flock closer, grateful for the company. The musicians welcomed him warmly, offering a share of their bread and cheese in exchange for a handful of wool. Alen accepted, sitting with them under the shade. They played a lively tune, their music blending with the rustling leaves and the gentle hum of the hills. Alen couldn't help but tap his foot, the melody lifting his spirits. As the sun climbed higher, Alen bid the musicians farewell, their songs still echoing in his mind as he continued along the path. The hills began to flatten, and the landscape opened into a wide, sunlit plateau. Here, the grasses grew tall, their golden tips shimmering like threads of light. Bryn darted playfully through the stalks, his joyful barks carrying across the fields. In the distance, Alen spotted a small farmstead. A weathered sign at its gate read, "Fresh milk and bread." The sight of the inviting home reminded him of his family, and he decided to stop. A kindly woman emerged from the house, her apron dusted with flour. "Come in, lad," she said, smiling warmly. "You and your flock look like you could use a break." Alen guided the sheep to a shaded enclosure by the barn and followed the woman into her kitchen. The scent of baking bread filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of fresh cream. She placed a bowl of hearty stew before him, along with a slice of warm bread slathered in butter. As he ate, the woman told him stories of the hills, of the travelers who passed through, and the traditions of the farmers who called this place home. She wrapped a small loaf of bread and a jar of fresh butter for him to take on his journey, refusing payment when he tried to offer coins. "Your kindness is enough," she said, her smile gentle. "Safe travels, young shepherd." The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. The hills began to descend, leading toward a stretch of dense forest that marked the edge of the plateau. The golden light of the setting sun painted the hills in hues of amber and crimson, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the wind. Alen set up camp near the edge of the forest, choosing a spot sheltered by a large rock. He built a small fire and prepared tea using the herbs from his satchel. The evening air was cool, carrying the distant calls of night birds and the soft rustle of leaves. Bryn lay curled by the fire, his eyes half closed as Alen stroked his fur. As the stars emerged, dotting the sky like scattered jewels, Alen felt a profound sense of peace. The journey through the sunlit hills had been filled with beauty and kindness, a reminder of the simple joys that lay along the road. With a heart full of gratitude and a mind ready for the challenges ahead, he drifted into a restful sleep, the soft glow of the fire keeping the night at bay. The first light of dawn brushed the horizon as Alen and his flock emerged from the forest's edge. Ahead, the road widened, leading directly to the market town nestled in the valley. Its spires and rooftops glistened with morning dew, and the faint hum of life reached Alan's ears, a promise of bustling streets and busy trade. The sheep moved briskly, their energy renewed by the morning's crisp air. Bryn darted ahead, guiding the flock with ease, his keen eyes scanning for any strays. Alen adjusted the strap of his satchel, now heavier with small treasures from his journey. Lavender sprigs, fresh butter, and the kindness of strangers woven into every step. As the town gates came into view, Alan's heart quickened. The smell of roasting chestnuts and spiced cider wafted through the air, mingling with the distant clatter of wagon wheels and the calls of merchants. The guard at the gate greeted him with a cheerful wave. "Back again, young shepherd?" the guard said, recognizing him from past visits. Alen nodded with a smile. Another season, another flock to tend. Inside the town, the cobblestone streets bustled with activity. Stalls lined the main road, their vibrant canopies creating a patchwork of colors. Merchants called out their wares, enticing passers-by with fresh produce, bolts of fabric, and gleaming trinkets. Children wove through the crowd, laughter trailing behind them as they chased one another. Alen led his flock to the designated market pen, a large enclosure shaded by towering oak trees. Other shepherds were already there, their flocks mingling as buyers moved between them, inspecting the sheep and discussing prices. Alen secured his flock and set up a small station nearby, arranging his tools and preparing for the shearing process. A familiar merchant approached, his sharp eyes scanning the flock. "Alen, you've brought fine sheep again this season," he said, running a practiced hand over the fleece of one ewe. "Fresh wool, I assume?" Alen nodded. "Sheared on site, just as you like." The merchant grinned. "Good lad, let's see the quality." With deft hands, Alen began shearing one of the sheep, his movements precise and practiced. The fleece fell away in soft, even layers, piling neatly at his feet. The merchant nodded approvingly as he weighed the wool. "Excellent, as always. I'll take this lot and return for more shortly." By midday, the pen was alive with activity. Buyers bartered with shepherds, their voices rising above the bleats of the sheep. Alen worked steadily, shearing one sheep after another, the rhythmic snip of his shears blending with the hum of the market. Each bundle of wool added to the growing pile at his station, and the coins in his satchel grew heavier with each transaction. When the last sheep was shorn, Alen took a moment to stretch, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The flock, now lighter and content, grazed peacefully in the shaded enclosure. Bryn lay nearby, his tail wagging lazily as he watched the activity around him. Satisfied with the morning's work, Alen ventured into the heart of the market. He stopped at a bakery where the scent of fresh bread drew him in. The baker, a jovial woman with flour-dusted hands, greeted him warmly. "Alen, I saved a few honey cakes for you," she said, placing a neatly wrapped bundle into his hands. "I know how much your sisters love them." Alen chuckled. "Thank you, Marta. They'll be thrilled." He exchanged a few coins for the cakes and continued through the market, his eyes drawn to the vibrant displays at each stall. He purchased ribbons in bright hues for his sisters, a small tin of spices for his mother, and a sharpening stone for his father, carefully choosing items that would bring joy to his family. As afternoon faded into evening, the market began to quiet. Lanterns were lit, their warm glow casting a soft light over the cobblestones. Alen returned to the pen, ensuring the sheep were secure for the night. He set up a small camp nearby, the flickering firelight reflecting in Bryn's watchful eyes. Over a simple meal of bread and cheese, Alen reflected on the day. The market town had welcomed him once again, its lively streets and kind faces weaving a familiar comfort into his journey. The weight of his satchel, now filled with both coins and thoughtful gifts, felt lighter than the gratitude that filled his heart. As the stars emerged, Alen lay back on his blanket, the sounds of the town fading into the gentle rhythm of the night. Bryn curled up beside him, his steady breathing a lullaby. Alen closed his eyes, knowing that this chapter of his journey had been a success. Tomorrow he would begin the path home, carrying with him the hopes and love of those who waited for his return. The first rays of dawn kissed the rooftops of the market town as Alen prepared to leave. The cobblestone streets were still quiet, with only the faint sounds of early risers stirring within their homes. Alen secured the sheep in their pen one last time, ensuring each one was ready for the journey back. Their freshly shorn wool, now lightened, glistened in the early light, a testament to the hard work of the past days. Bryn waited patiently by Alen's side, his tail wagging in slow anticipation. Alen glanced at his satchel, now filled not only with the coins earned from the wool, but also with the gifts he had carefully chosen for his family. It felt heavier, though the weight was a comforting reminder of his purpose. As the morning progressed, villagers began to emerge, waving goodbye and offering warm wishes for his return journey. Marta, the baker, hurried out with one last parcel of honey cakes, tucking it into Alen's hands. "For the road," she said with a smile. "Safe travels, lad." "Thank you," Alen replied earnestly, tucking the package into his satchel. He led the flock out through the town gates, the rhythmic clatter of their hooves echoing on the stone. The road stretched ahead, familiar yet filled with new promise. Alen felt the pull of home in every step, imagining the smiles of his family as he recounted the stories of his journey. The path wound gently upward, leading back toward the rolling hills he had crossed days earlier. The sun climbed higher, warming the land and casting long shadows across the golden fields. Alen paused at a small stream that crossed the path, letting the sheep drink while he refilled his flask. The water was cool and refreshing, its gentle babble a soothing melody in the quiet morning. Bryn, ever vigilant, stood watch as Alen rested under the shade of an oak tree. He pulled out one of Marta's honey cakes, savoring the sweetness as he reflected on the market's bustle. The laughter of children, the hum of merchants, and the warmth of familiar faces lingered in his memory, blending with the anticipation of home. As the journey continued, Alen came across a group of farmers tending to their fields. One of them, a kind-faced man with a wide-brimmed hat, waved him over. "Good day to you, shepherd," the farmer called out. "You're heading home, I see." "Yes," Alen replied, stopping to exchange a few words. The farmer handed him a small basket of ripe berries that made their deep crimson hue shining in the sunlight. "Take these for your family," the farmer said. "A little sweetness for your journey." Alen thanked him, tucking the basket into his satchel. The generosity of those he met along the road filled him with gratitude, their kindness a reminder of the interconnectedness of their lives. By midday, Alen reached the crest of a hill that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. The sight took his breath away. Fields of wheat swayed gently in the breeze, and in the distance, the faint outline of his village came into view. It was still far, but the familiarity of the landscape filled him with renewed energy. The descent was steady, the path flanked by wildflowers in full bloom. Alen hummed softly, a tune his mother often sang at home. The sheep moved easily, their steady pace mirroring his own. Bryn occasionally darted ahead, chasing after butterflies or sniffing at the tall grass, his playful antics a source of quiet amusement. Toward evening, Alen came upon a small inn by the roadside, its warm glow beckoning travelers. Deciding to rest for the night, he led the flock to a sheltered paddock nearby. The innkeeper, a jovial man with a booming laugh, welcomed him warmly. "Come in, lad. A meal and a bed will do you good after a long day's walk." Inside, the inn was cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth and the scent of roasted meat filling the air. Alen settled at a wooden table where a hearty stew and a crusty loaf of bread were brought to him. The simple meal was a comfort, each bite reminding him of home. As he ate, other travelers shared stories of their own journeys, tales of distant lands, challenges faced, and the joys of returning to loved ones. Alen listened intently, their words painting vivid pictures in his mind. Later that night, Alen lay on a cot in a small room overlooking the paddock. The sheep rested quietly, their soft murmurs blending with the rustle of leaves outside. Bryn curled up at the foot of the bed, his steady breathing a soothing presence. Alen gazed out at the stars, his thoughts filled with the warmth of the day's encounters and the promise of home just beyond the horizon. Tomorrow, he would continue his journey, each step bringing him closer to the familiar embrace of his family and the place he called home. Morning broke with a golden hue as Alen stepped out of the inn, the crisp air filling his lungs. Bryn stretched beside him, wagging his tail enthusiastically as if ready to take on the day. The sheep stirred in the paddock, their soft bleats signaling readiness for the journey ahead. Alen secured his satchel, which now brimmed with the fruits of his efforts, coins, gifts, and memories, and led the flock back onto the dirt path. The road wound gently through familiar meadows, the landscape glowing under the morning sun. Fields of wildflowers bordered the path, their vibrant hues swaying with the breeze. Alen inhaled deeply, the sweet scent of blooming lavender and fresh grass evoking a sense of nostalgia. Each step felt lighter as he drew closer to home. A small wooden bridge spanned a stream up ahead, its clear waters glistening as they tumbled over smooth stones. Alen paused to let the sheep drink while he crouched to refill his flask. The cool water refreshed him, and he splashed a little onto Bryn, who barked playfully before shaking the droplets off his fur. As Alen rested by the stream, a familiar voice called out from the other side of the bridge. "Alen, is that you?" Looking up, he saw an old family friend, Eamon, a farmer who lived in a nearby hamlet. The man waved cheerfully, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "It's been too long, boy," Eamon said as he approached. "On your way home, are you?" "I am," Alen replied with a smile. "It's good to see you, Eamon. How have you been?" The two exchanged stories, their laughter echoing across the meadows. Eamon reached into the sack slung over his shoulder and handed Alen a bundle of freshly picked herbs. "Take these for your mother. They'll add a bit of flavor to her stews." Alen accepted the gift gratefully. "Thank you. She'll be delighted." By midday, the path widened, revealing a patchwork of fields and pastures. Farmers worked diligently, their movements synchronized as they tended to crops. Alen stopped at a roadside stall run by a young girl and her father, who were selling jars of honey and bundles of dried lavender. The girl's eyes lit up as Alen approached. "Would you like to buy some honey, sir?" she asked eagerly. Alen chuckled and nodded. "I'll take a jar, please." Her father handed him a neatly wrapped jar, its golden contents catching the sunlight. Alen handed over a few coins and thanked them, imagining how much his sisters would enjoy the sweet treat. The afternoon passed in a gentle rhythm, the road weaving through hills and meadows. The sheep moved steadily, their shorn wool making the journey easier. Bryn occasionally darted off to chase a rabbit or investigate a rustling bush, always returning to Alan's side with a wag of his tail. Alen found a shaded grove to rest as the sun began its descent. He set down his satchel and allowed the sheep to graze while he leaned against a tree, pulling out the honey cake Marta had given him. The sweet, sticky treat melted on his tongue, a perfect accompaniment to the calm of the moment. As the day wore on, the path began to slope downward, leading toward a familiar bend in the road. Alen recognized the large oak tree that marked the halfway point to his village. Its gnarled branches stretched out like welcoming arms, and he paused beneath its shade, running his hand along the rough bark. The golden hour bathed the landscape in warm light, casting long shadows across the fields. Alan's pace quickened as the signs of home became more apparent. A wooden fence, a narrow creek, and finally, the faint outline of his village appeared on the horizon. Bryn barked excitedly, as if sensing the proximity of home. The sheep, too, seemed livelier, their bleats carrying a tone of anticipation. Alen felt a swell of emotion as he envisioned his family waiting at the gate, their faces lighting up at the sight of him and the flock. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as Alen continued down the path. The familiar sounds of the village began to reach his ears, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of children, and the faint melody of a flute being played near the square. With his heart full and his steps light, Alen pressed on, the promise of home guiding him forward. The journey had been long, but each moment, each kindness, challenge, and quiet reflection had shaped the story he would soon share with those who waited eagerly for his return. The sky was painted with hues of twilight as Alen reached the final stretch of the path leading to his village. The familiar sights and sounds filled his heart with joy. Bryn ran ahead, his barks carrying through the cool evening air as if announcing their arrival. The sheep, sensing the end of their journey, bleated softly, their steps quickening. As Alen rounded the last bend, the village came fully into view. The cottages, with their thatched roofs and glowing windows, looked like a scene from a treasured memory. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the scent of hearty meals and the warmth of home. The faint hum of evening chatter and the occasional burst of laughter drifted toward him, wrapping him in a comforting embrace. Near the edge of the village, Alen saw his family waiting by the gate. His mother stood with her hands clasped tightly, her face lighting up with a mix of relief and happiness. His father, tall and sturdy, rested one hand on the gate, his usual stern expression softened by a smile. Alen's younger sisters stood beside them, hopping in excitement as they spotted him. "Alen!" they cried, their voices echoing across the field. He waved, his steps quickening until he was running. Bryn, bounding alongside him, reached the gate first, greeting everyone with enthusiastic barks. Alen's sisters rushed forward, throwing their arms around him, their laughter bubbling over with joy. "You're back!" one of them exclaimed, tugging at his satchel. "Did you bring the ribbons?" "And the honey cakes," the other added, her eyes wide with anticipation. Alen laughed, ruffling their hair. "I brought ribbons, cakes, and more. But first, let's get the sheep settled." His father approached, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome home, son," he said warmly. "You've done well." Alen nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Together, they guided the flock into the familiar pen beside the cottage. The sheep moved easily, their journey complete. Bryn took his usual post near the gate, his watchful eyes scanning the area even in the safety of home. Inside the cottage, the hearth blazed brightly, casting a warm glow over the room. Alen set his satchel on the table and began unpacking its treasures. He handed the ribbons to his sisters, who squealed with delight, and the jar of honey to his mother, whose eyes glistened with gratitude. "This will be a treat for the winter," she said, holding it close. "Thank you, Alen." For his father, Alen retrieved the sharpening stone, its smooth surface catching the firelight. His father turned it over in his hands, nodding appreciatively. "You've thought of everything," he said. "This will serve us well." The family gathered around the table for supper, the meal simple but hearty. Fresh bread, stew, and a touch of honey from the jar made the perfect feast. Alen shared stories of his journey, recounting the kind strangers he met, the challenges he overcame, and the beauty of the landscapes he had crossed. His family listened intently, their expressions ranging from awe to laughter as he painted vivid pictures of his adventure. After the meal, Alen stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing after the warmth of the cottage. The village was quiet now, the sounds of the evening fading into a peaceful stillness. He looked up at the stars, their light shimmering like a tapestry above him. Bryn sat beside him, leaning into his side as if sharing the moment. Alan's thoughts wandered to the lessons of his journey, the kindness of strangers, the beauty of simple moments, and the fulfillment of returning home. He felt a deep gratitude for the experience, knowing it had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. As he stood there, his mother joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "The journey changes you, doesn't it?" she said softly, her eyes fixed on the stars. "It does," Alen replied, "but it also makes coming home even more special." She smiled, resting a hand on his arm. "We're proud of you, Alen. You've done more than bring back wool and coins. You've brought back stories, memories, and pieces of the world we wouldn't have known otherwise." Alen nodded, the weight of her words settling warmly in his heart. Together, they stood in the quiet night, the glow of the cottage behind them and the vast sky above. When Alen finally went to bed, the familiar creak of the wooden frame and the softness of the quilt felt like an embrace. Bryn curled up at the foot of the bed, his steady breathing a soothing rhythm. As sleep took him, Alen's dreams were filled with golden hills, whispering forests, and the comforting thought that no matter how far he traveled, home would always be waiting. The journey had ended, but its stories would live on, retold by the hearth and carried in his heart. Thank you for joining us on Story Planet, where tales unfold to help you unwind. If you felt the warmth of home, the charm of the markets, and the peaceful rhythm of a shepherd's journey, consider giving a thumbs up. Share this heartfelt adventure with friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe for more relaxing and peaceful stories. Wishing you restful night and sweet dreams.